Hi, everyone. This is Al Filreis, and I am here at the Kelly Writers House in the great city of Philadelphia, in the state of Pennsylvania, in the country of USA. And we're joined by lots of viewers already from around the world. We're very excited. Sophia Duros, just name some places where people are participating from.
We've got people checking in from Ecuador, Wyoming, California, Ireland, India, Canada, the Netherlands.
Whoa, wait,
Yeah.
What the heck? Oh, hello to everybody in so many time zones. Well, I want to introduce my co-conveners, and then we're going to get started. This is a special off-season webcast that's been co-hosted by the University of Porto in Portugal. And João, I might as well introduce João right away because he is the co-convener of the whole thing. I'm going to say the surname in the best way I possibly can. Guimarães. Did I do it, João? Did I do it?
Almost.
Okay,
Almost right.
From now on, you're going to be João, associated with the University of Porto in Portugal. João, thank you so much for coming up with this idea. What a great team we're making. Folks there at the University of Porto and here at the University of Pennsylvania, thank you. Why did you? This is part of a series. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're at this moment only chatting with poetry scholars. We did a bunch of videos before on just talking with different poets from the States and other countries, right? We have one with Charles Bernstein, one with Marie Buck, Rob Fitterman, etc. Right? So those are all in our YouTube channel of the Comparative Literature Institute. If you're interested, you can check it out. And we're gonna keep talking with poetry scholars and their new releases.
Great. So our technical team, Zach Gardner and Chris Martin, are here. Snaps for them, everybody. Yay. It's very easy for them to make the recorded copy that will be posted to our YouTube page and send you a copy so you can repost it. So we're just so happy to be collaborating with you today. João, thank you. Also want to introduce Elin Käck, who is in Sweden. Elin, hello.
Hello.
You and I have been in touch over the years. This is the first time we're seeing each other.
I am an old ModPoer, actually.
Yay!
Hey.
That's how we connected. Oh, fabulous. ModPo
that's
in Sweden.
the first time.
So, you're giving the team here a crazy idea. Can you, if we come to Sweden, could you get a few people together for us and have a ModPo gathering?
Well, I might. I mean, it was years since I was a ModPoer, but I know some people. Since I'm a scholar now. So
Chris is fainting. Chris Martin is so wanting to go. Stockholm would be good.
I would love to have you.
Okay, well, we travel every October. Your job would be to get a bunch of Swedes to come join us. But so anyway, Ellen, thank you. It's great to see you, and thanks for participating. Elina Siltanen is in Finland. Hello, Elina. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
And you're affiliated with the University of Turku, and it's just wonderful to have you. João, we've introduced. And now I also want to introduce Gabby Ojeda-Segay, who's in Chicago at a coffee shop. It's a pretty high-end coffee shop there, Gabby.
I'm technically in the old post office, which is like a building that has become a massive office space and has like cafes in the lobby. So I'm kind of in their lobby. But hello, it's good to
You're
be
in
here.
the lobby. Okay, Chicago is actually kind of appealing in this way,
Yeah, I like it. I mean, there's reasons that I'm here that I won't bore you with, but basically, it was inconvenient to be home.
I think
so
it's a cat-related problem, no doubt, right?
No.
Okay.
No, the cats are good. They would
trying to
be
get you off
here
the hook.
They'd be here commenting on Nude Descending a Staircase if they could be. But
Yeah, well, I think cats descending a staircase is a common thing for all cat owners, right? They have a way of descending a staircase that is downright Duchampian, I think. And we'll talk
think that's
more.
right.
We'll talk more about that. I don't really know what the fuck I'm talking about generally.
I don't either.
Speaking. Okay, yes, and Sophia chimes in. We also don't know what you're talking about. And there's Lainey Brown. Hello, Lainey Brown. How are you?
Hello, it's nice to see everyone. I want to read the poem Cats Descending a Staircase. Maybe somebody will write that.
Yeah, I don't know. You could go to ChatGPT and that should probably... João wants us to. No, that is banned. No, it's not banned. It should be something that happens in week 9 of ModPo, but not any other time. Okay. Yes, Lainey. Hello. And to my far left, and your, as you view, far right, though neither of those things. Well, definitely far left. I don't know about far right. We have Sophia Durose. Hello, Sophia.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Okay. And Sophia is not only going to be typically brilliant today talking about this stuff, but is also going to be watching the Twitter feed. So if anyone watching this has comments, and if you're Twitter friendly, or if Twitter is friendly to you, or you just habitually use it, you can use the hashtag ModPoLive, ModPolive, ModPoLive hashtag. And if you want to connect to us, to our feed, we are at ModPoPen, at ModPoPen, or hashtag ModPoLive. Sophia's going to look at that. Hello, Sophia. Did you already say hello?
I did. Hi.
Okay. Hello again. And to my immediate left, though on the spectrum of ideas, we are very close. Amber Rose Johnson. Amber Rose, woohoo! Why am I the only one applauding? And Amber Rose Johnson, long time ModPo TA, is going to the status of cameo ModPo person.
Yeah.
Because drum roll, because Amber Rose Johnson will soon be taking up a position on the faculty of McGill University in Montreal, Quebec.
That's awesome.
And we are so happy. Look at all these people clapping. We're so happy, and I'm sure the YouTube comment feed is just bursting with congratulations. Am I right about that, Lainey Brown?
They're still talking about cats, but I'm sure those congratulations
Oh, you
are
know
coming.
why? Because there's a delay.
Okay.
Cats, Amber Rose, cats,
I am
Amber
a Leo.
Rose.
I am a Leo.
Okay, let me
Amber
have some
Rose,
of that Portuguese bread.
Okay. Here you go.
Okay.
Fake
João,
Portuguese bread.
I'm sorry you're not here.
Fake Portuguese
Wait,
bread. No, I feel.
Wait, how do you know
João
it's fake?
is like, I do not approve of this.
You know
I
what?
have never
It
heard
I
of
tastes
can't
like-
see it, but I'm just assuming, you know.
It tastes like challah.
Really? It's like a sweet, yeah, it's fluffy,
an enriched dough.
Yeah, it is. Okay, I went to a Portuguese bakery growing up. They had something called Portuguese sweetbread. I left Providence. I'm on an endless pursuit to reproduce this bread. It may or may not actually be Portuguese.
João, you are aware that Providence, Rhode Island, has been a main place for Portuguese Americans. Going back to whaling, maybe? I don't know if that's right. Yeah? Okay, great.
Boats, ships.
Yeah. It's the second language of Providence, I would say. Okay, let's start talking. Ellen and Elina are thinking, what? Is this typical of these webcasts, that they never get started?
Yes.
It's just a friendly thing. This is why the community is so strong. We just really are more about us than about the poems. So today we're going to be talking about the famous painting by Marcel Duchamp.
Oh gosh. This is
dry.
why you can't. This is why you can't. This is why.
This bread is dry.
Wow. We'll have a conversation about that at another time.
This
Please.
painting is very, very famous. Nude Descending a Staircase. We could say it's Cubist. We'll say a lot more about it. And then many years later, a young poet at the time, X.J. Kennedy, published his first book of poems called Nude Descending a Staircase. The title of the book was his first book. It was very well received. And when João suggested that we have a webcast that was partly based on political poetry and the politics of poetry, and with respect to a book that I had published on the year, not poetry and other things, in the year 1960, and the politics of that, I thought, well, let's not have me dryly talking about the literary politics of 1960 or about my book, which I am happy that I published, but not really wanting to convene a webcast about. We kind of came up with the idea of talking about the X.J. Kennedy poem as a response. We might say an after-modernist response. We might say an anti-modernist response. We might say taking Duchamp to the next level, as it were. We might say all kinds of things. And that is, Zach, can you bring back our, thanks. And that is our job today, which is to talk among ourselves about the relationship between these two art objects, one being critical to the modernist revolution in visual arts, and it also had a tremendous effect on conceptual poetry right then and later. And this poem of quatrains that is rhymed, published in 1960. Was it a rearguard action? What are the literary politics? So that's really what we're talking about today. So we ask you, those who are watching from around the world, to do one or several or all of three things. One is to call us on the telephone at 610-616-3208. And Chris is going to remind me how we can do that through, I think we have a Skype connection. Is that correct? Hi, Chris.
Hello. Yes, we do. You can also call via Skype directly. ModPo Pen is the username to search for in Skype, and that works just as well, especially if it's a long-distance call somewhere else in the world. That saves you
some money, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's two ways to call. And Chris Martin he's got a mellifluous voice. Say mellifluous. Yeah. He's got a sweet voice, mellifluous voice. And he'll talk to you, and then your voice will actually come into the room here, and everyone will get to hear it. We do encourage you to call 610-616-3208. A second way to do it is to comment in the YouTube stream, and Lainey is looking at that, and Sophia is as well. And Sophia is also looking at Twitter, hashtag ModPoLive. All right, so I am going to ask, Ellen, would you be willing to read the Kennedy poem, just to put it into the record? And then after Ellen is done doing that, I'm going to ask Zach to put the painting up so we can all look at it. And I would like to ask anyone who's watching to also put a link to any number of the web copies of the painting into the YouTube chat, so that everybody can have it on a window in their whatever device they're using. So Ellen, do you mind? Sorry to spring that on you.
That's fine. I'll do it. I'll give it a shot. So, Nude Descending a Staircase. Toe after toe, a snowing flesh, a gold of lemon, root and rind. She sifts in sunlight down the stairs with nothing on, nor on her mind. We spy beneath the banister, a constant thresh of thigh on thigh. Her lips imprint the swinging air that parts to let her parts go by. One woman waterfall she wears, her slow descent like a long cape, and pausing on the final stair, collects her motions into shape.
Thank you. Snaps for Ellen. That was a great reading. Zach, do you want to put the painting up? So let's see how that works. So you should all be seeing the painting of Nude Descending a Staircase. This is number 2, I believe. No, is this number 2? Is this the one at the Philadelphia Museum of Art? I think it's not. I don't think it is, but it's close enough.
I emailed you the link that we were using.
Okay. So I would like to get, and many of you have seen other versions of this, so I'd like for all of us just to say a brief word about what they see in this painting, just for starters, particularly thinking that there are a lot of people who know of it but haven't really spent a lot of time staring at it. So we'll go in this order: Sophia, Gabby, João, Ellen, Elina, Amber Rose, and Lainey. Everybody's got a quick thing to say. And for those of you at home or wherever you are, this is your chance to comment on it or give us a call and comment on the painting. Sophia, you're first.
Okay. I guess my first thought when I look at the painting is that it seems more to me about the motion of descending than a nude.
Mm-hmm. Great. Good start. Gabby?
Yeah, I mean, actually, somewhat similar. Just if this is a Cubist painting, which is sort of up for grabs, it's betraying some core principle of Cubism, which is something like a kind of flatness, a sort of still uniplane representation. This is kind of like starting to shift those portions of the Cubist portrait together to create this illusion of motion in a way that was sort of upsetting to the kind of like more classically, I don't know, Picasso, Lamb style of Cubism.
Interesting. So, Gabby, you're actually questioning whether this is it's famously kinetic. People say it's very kinetic. Mm-hmm. And you're actually questioning that. It doesn't seem so kinetic.
No, other way around. I'm saying that, like, I think this is maybe not Cubist because it's kinetic. That it's sort of a response to Cubism, but it's also sort of like moving away from something that I think is defining for Cubism.
That's very interesting. We'll come back to that. Before we turn to João, I just want to say that, for 6 months or so, Ezra Pound was an imagist. And then for, I don't know, a week, he was a cubist. I'm being funny here. And then he became a vorticist. And it's arguable that this is a vorticist painting in the sense of its kineticism. Okay, João, what are your thoughts on the painting?
Well, we've talked about it being kinetic and the dynamism of the painting, but especially since we're going to be talking about, as you said, a very neat, pretty poem that is rhymed and is very safe, maybe, right? Here, I'd like to maybe draw attention to how like ugly and grotesque this painting ends up being, right? It's not just movement, right? It's actually there's an element of disjuncture between like a nude. We expect it to be like sensual and sexy, erotic even, right? And here it's quite the opposite, at least on first glance, right? We may discuss whether that is or is not the case.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so it is
ugly.
It is consciously, intentionally contradicting the tradition in painting of associations and connotations of the word nude. Nude, through the 18th and 19th century, would automatically create a certain set of values, visual values and painterly values. This is obviously radically contradicting that. So I think that's a really great point. So let's turn to Ellen now. Your thought on the painting?
I have many thoughts, but
you can give us two since you're a special guest, and you're going to be our host in Stockholm. So you might as well start, receiving goodies now.
One thing that just struck me, because I'm a Williams scholar, and it struck me that in his autobiography he even writes about it and says that it's too hackneyed for me to remember. But I remember how I laughed out loud when I first saw it, happily, with relief. And as you said, it's like not an ingres or an odalisque or like some kind of classic nude. It's very different. But my mind instantly goes to, I don't know, machines, rust. It seems very industrial to me. And if it's working out movement the way that futurists like Giacomo Balla perhaps was doing the year before with his dynamism of a dog on a leash or something like that. That one is much softer. So this seems to me, it's quite heavily industrial, I would say. And
could you, Ellen, comment on the relationship between Williams? That's a famous passage you're describing. I thought my memory is that he used the word glee, but that was maybe my just paraphrase of his reaction. He sort of
I prepared.
laughed.
So it says, laughed out happily with relief.
Yeah, relief, yeah.
Maybe he wrote about it elsewhere. I'm not sure.
No, I think you're right. I think I've just sort of, over the years, have translated that into Williams finally seeing comradeship on the walls of a gallery. That's our impression. I mean, Williams was like, I'm not alone. oh my gosh, there are other people who think the way I do. And I think I don't think he was reacting so much to the painterly qualities as the fact that such a thing could have been done. Do you mind commenting very briefly, Ellen, before we turn to Elina, about the relationship between Williams and industrial, you use the word industrialism, I think. Anyway, industrial.
Of course.
Williams really thought that what his poems were doing was very similar to this.
I did use the word industrial, and I think I used the word machine. So Williams, of course, famously called the poem a machine made of words. So in that sense, there's one analogy that you could work with, perhaps. But then I'm also thinking about this aspect of Williams that I think really reverberates between him and Duchamp, that has to do with using materials that are nearby and that are almost, in Williams's case, almost found objects, like a wheelbarrow, for instance, and having that be worthy of being in a poem, just as the fountain or something like that in Duchamp.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to turn to Elina, Amber Rose, and Lainey to talk about the painting, but I want to take a pause and ask Lainey and Sophia what kind of comments we've been receiving in the chat or in Twitter. Lainey, what do you see?
Sure, there's a lot of great, lively discussion going on in the chat about the poem, the painting, and the poem happening at the same time. Vijaya asks.
Vijaya, hello, good morning.
Hi, Vijaya.
It's really early out there in California.
Duchamp dehumanized the nude, which I thought was really interesting. And Jen Levin writes, nothing in this painting to suggest male or female, except Duchamp's title, which is the masculine nude. Jane Ward writes, not cubist. I have to think about that. Yeah, a lot of great conversation going on.
Well, thank you all. And Sophia, anything happening in Twitter?
Nothing happening.
Nothing. Okay, that's fine. Twitter has Twitter used to be a thing for ModPo people. Now it's less a thing, but that's fine. We go where we want to go. Now we're going to turn to Elina for a comment, any comment on the painting, but I just want to remind everybody that Chris is getting lonely, 610-616-3208, or you can audio Skype us at ModPo. Is it ModPo Pen? At ModPo Pen, 610-616-3208. The first caller, I don't have books with me to give away right here, but the first caller is going to get a free book mailed to you, a really cool book of poetry, I promise you. So call us. Elina, can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on the painting.
Yeah, so thus far people have talked about motion and how it's maybe ugly, grotesque, industrial, and I agree with all of those things. But then also something that strikes me as interesting here is that how nondescript the painting really is. Like, if we didn't have the title, would we be able to convincingly say that it's definitely a nude person, or just like the YouTube commentator was saying that we don't really know whether it's male or female either. So that's maybe the main thing that I would like to point out.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think when we talk about the poem, Elina, I'm going to make a mental note to return to you and think about the poem in this same way, because the poem definitely genders the figure so much more adamantly, and we might say conventionally. We have someone on the phone, so Amber Rose, hold your fire. We're going to see, maybe you can just respond to this person. Chris, do we have someone calling just to say hello to you, or is this...
Still finding out.
You're still finding out. Okay, Amber Rose, what are your thoughts about the painting?
I'm thinking about Vijaya's comment, actually, about the dehumanization, and I've been thinking about the fact that there isn't a face here. And to me, I do think that shape-wise, I could imagine this as a human figure, but I am really interested in the fact that there's no face, there's no gaze. And I think when there's no gaze to engage with, the focus of the poem really becomes about form and our sort of expectations, both of form and of the subject, or the subject of the form. Yeah.
I love that. That's a really good observation. And it's also going to help us with Kennedy, because Kennedy, the speaker, is resolutely looking, gazing. And here in the painting, you're saying that the painting is not gazing back.
Right. I'm saying that the painting isn't gazing back, and because the painting isn't gazing back, our eye and our questions wander elsewhere to what else we can get out of this interaction with this painting.
Is it too much to say, tell me if I'm off base here, that it follows from your comment that the subjectivity of the painting is the painter, the point of view that's being depicted by the oil on the canvas, and that there is no intersubjectivity? The subject of the figure going down the stairs is not producing a subjectivity back.
Yes.
So that is a problem, issue, concern, and something we'll want to talk about.
For sure.
Okay, Chris, is it indeed someone who wants to talk to us, or are they just calling because they want a mug?
Give me 1 second.
All right,
Al, we have Caroline McCrae calling.
Caroline,
where are you calling from? Oh, from Philly. Okay, a local call. We're gonna put you through.
A local call.
Stay tuned. Okay, should be live.
Hi, Caroline. How are you?
Hi, sorry, I'm well. So I was mostly wondering how.
You're
how
getting right into the question. Can I ask you a question first?
Okay, sure.
You're in Philly. What's your connection to us? Are you a ModPo person, or just saw the announcement and thought you'd check it out?
I'm a ModPo person, and I sound so annoying. I'm a scholar of modern poetry, particularly the poetry of T.S. Eliot. So I was mostly interested in how the poem and the painting approach unity. That is, for example, the simultaneity of both the poem as a composition of dispersed objects and elements, and also how essentially it's this reconciliation of these, of these various elements, of these different instantiations of the same figure walking down the staircase, but how it relies both on its dispersed nature and the unity to provide depth, and how that might compare to other poems about painting, such as, for example, Plath's Two Views of a Cadaver Room, or Musée de Beaux-Arts by Auden, or Ginsberg's Cézanne's Ports, because I'd see those as, which tend to focus on one part of either the painting that it is juxtaposed by the rest of the painting. For example, in Landscape of the Fall of Icarus, which was the inspiration for Musée de Beaux-Arts, the banality of the everyday is juxtaposed with the momentousness of Icarus falling into the sea. And in Sylvia Plath's Triumph of Death, there is the overall brutality and carnage is juxtaposed by the lovers in the corner. And in Ginsberg's poem, he states that, like, the point of the poem, the focal point of the poem where the eye is drawn to, doesn't occur on the painting at all, that it is, I think, heaven and eternal, which is where time and, I think he says, life would meet. But essentially, how do you think both the poem, Kennedy's poem, and Duchamp's painting, how they approach unity and dispersion of their elements?
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Caroline, for that. Is it okay if we turn to some of our folks here to respond to your question while you hang up and listen through the webcast?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Come by the Writer's House sometime if you're in Philly.
Okay.
Love to see you here.
Thank you.
I want to turn to Lainey, Sophia, Gabby, and Joao in that order, just to get us to follow Caroline's lead and to think about the poem as a poem about a painting. Leaving aside the poem as its own thing for the moment, because we're going to get to that in a second, following the spirit of Caroline's comment, giving us lots of examples of poems about paintings. What kind of poem about painting is this? Starting with Lainey.
Sure. Well, the first thing, I guess, is this conversation across time. If the painting is painted in 1912 and the poem is 19 60. And it seems to me that the poem is really interested in unity, and the painting is really interested in kind of a disintegration.
To say the least, that's its ideology. It's the ideology of fragmentation.
Right. So I think that the poem is kind of almost a protest or a refuting of this idea of forward motion that and provoking that Duchamp is in favor of. And just wanted to add to the earlier conversation about kind of what's happening in the painting. I'm really interested in this notion of a new tradition of the nude, in which it's not an erotic gaze, but what does it mean to be nude when you're looking at this painting? Could it be, so we don't have a face, we don't really have sex, we don't really have gender, but if the body is motion, we can understand that from physics now. We can understand that,
right.
Really clearly. Then to me, it's a different kind of beauty, it's a different kind of way of depicting reality and portraiture. Also, nudes generally aren't walking down a staircase, right? So it's just pushing in all these new interesting directions. And it seems to me that the poem is resisting.
Yes, that's a great framing. We're going to turn to Sophia next. The idea of it being a reaction against the assumed ipso facto eroticization of the nude human body. That could be anti-romantic, capital R. It could be anti-Victorian, because Victorianism, literary Victorianism, is sort of famous for saying that we needed to pull back from that eroticization, but also expressing it unconsciously, intensely, and a lot of people would say badly. And so Duchamp this is part of the modernist revolution, to de-eroticize, to change the terms exactly as you say it. And I think this is really important. And Kennedy is standing in relation to that literary politics. And it's really interesting as such. Sophia, your thoughts on what kind of poem about painting this is?
Okay. I think there's like a subtle kind of duplicitousness to the meter, to the iambic tetrameter that the poem is in. It's because it was written in 1961. Like there's this motion against like this rise of free verse and the celebration of that. And I think it's easy to consider metered poetry such as iambic tetrameter as the convention, but for the time period that wasn't actually the case. And I think there's some sort of relationship between like this industrial aspect of the painting and like a composed mechanic of the meter here in the poem.
Wow, we are so going to get more into that when we focus on the poem itself, but that's a great introduction to that whole topic. Thank you. Gabby, your thought on what kind of poem about a painting this is?
Yeah, I mean, when we say like a poem about a painting, I mean, it makes me think of ekphrasis, which like is basically the translation of some kind of work of art into text as a description.
Which is inherently experimental, no?
I think so. But there's kind of valences to it, right? Like you can have an ekphrasis that is very literal, like attempting to kind of record a painting in just another form and say like, this is what it is. If you can't see the painting, here's a description of it. There's a very like functional version of it. What's odd to me about this poem as an ekphrasis is that it's like, it almost seems to want to replace the painting in a way. Like it almost wants to propose a different painting. Or it seems a summary of almost like a more traditional version of the painting that we know as Nude Descending a Staircase, rather than a capturing of Nude Descending a Staircase by Marcel Duchamp. And that seems to be like a proposal that, I don't know, it's odd to sit with, I think.
So it's kind of revisionist. It's got an ideology. It's a revisionist poem. It's a rereading of modernism, an intentional rereading.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, João, I'm going to invite you to be the last response to the question that Caroline raised, and then we're going to go on to the Kennedy poem, looking at it particularly. João, what are your thoughts?
So what I think the poem is trying to do is I think, as Gabby was saying, to capture the spirit of the painting, right? Or what it thinks is the spirit of the painting, at least, right? And summarize, right? So summarizing, I think, is the right word that Gabby also used, right? But it ends up being, the opposite of most of the things that we said, right? Like, instead of it being industrial and about fragmentation, it's very romantic, right? I think that's something a word that you also used, Al, right? Or you could see it maybe as a pop version, since we're in the 1960s, right? And it's the decade of pop, right? And it's a pop version of the painting, right? It's taking the most, I guess, pleasant qualities, right? The sublime, right? We're going to probably get into that when we start talking about the poem, but there's a lot of references to nature, right? Like the snow and water and whatnot, right? So and that's not in the painting at all, right? So I think it transports the poem into that sort of context instead, right? Of it being like, I think it's an homage to the painting, but as Gabby said, it's to a particular idea of what the painting is trying to accomplish.
João, you're the perfect co-host, co-convener, because you set us up for what we're going to do next, and appreciate that implicit hosting that you just did there. So now we're going to turn, starting with Ellen, followed by Elina, Amber Rose, and Lainey. We're going to turn to the poem itself, the language of the poem, the structure of it, the quatrains, the rhyme, and of course the speaker's point of view, which is my favorite, unfavorite topic in our discussions about this poem. So I invite you all, starting with Ellen, just to say anything at all about the language, the structure, the imagery, or the speaker's point of view, anything at all. What we're going to do in this next round is just accumulate ideas or information about it, and then go from there. So Ellen, you want to start? Anything?
Well, there's so much to say, but one thing I just wanted to go back to, this idea of the meter as being maybe not the expected mode of the time, but that I'm thinking walking down the staircase, maybe like pacing your steps, or maybe just marching on in a way. It's like maybe there's motion there, but it's also very like paced motion. It's controlled somehow. I found that interesting. And then I had this, since João mentioned romanticism, I had this feeling that I read one of the lines before, and I started thinking, what echo am I hearing? And I don't know if this is fair, but I felt like she sifts in sunlight down the stairs was very, she walks in beauty like the night, like Byronic. And that too, I mean, the very idea of sifting something as heavy as that which we saw in Duchamp is just, it's a completely different materiality that's suggested that is not there, I think, in the poem. Maybe in a way in the light, but not really very easy to imagine that being sifted in any kind of way.
Yeah.
I have so much more I want to say, but just going to leave it for the others.
Thank you for restraining yourself. But the point that you did make is fantastic. And I guess we're all going to have to reckon with the fact that X.J. Kennedy, a first book poet, it was not that well known when he published this book in 1960, or the poem was published in Poetry Magazine in 1960. Maybe the book is 61. He not only writes a poem which does this, kind of creates something that's not recognizable from the painting, uses the title of the painting, doesn't even hide it, and then names the book becomes the title poem of the book. So a big statement is being made here. And our job, the job that we like to do as people who care about the language of poetry, is not just to make the giant generalizations about the literary politics of it, but to find those politics in the writing, in the language of the poem. This is why poetry is so great. So let's turn to Elina for a thought or two about the poem, and then we have someone on the phone, so we'll pause and take the phone call. Elina, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, a lot has already been said about how the painting tries to capture movement and motion. And that's something that poetry can do too, but in somewhat different ways in language. And what Kennedy's poem doesn't really do that much. It doesn't really do a lot with movement. Like João was saying, it's not fragmentary, and it's sort of working towards one version of how we might view the poem. And I think ultimately what the poem does, it doesn't so much attempt to describe the movement of the person, but maybe it's more about other kinds of movement in the mind, in the viewer's mind. We have the speaker position here. So that's what seems to be going on here.
Yes, Elina, the we. I mean, that we I find really difficult to take myself, because it seems to speak for me too, because it makes me spy underneath this woman coming down the stairs. I don't want to be put in that position. So we is either, as you were suggesting in a kind and generous way, we is the I of the poem, but it really wants us to be there watching this woman come down the stairs. And so the gender politics here are going to start to come into play. Before we turn to Amber Rose, this always happens. We have a phone caller. Who is it, Chris Martin?
We have Paul Kelly calling from Wyoming.
Paul Kelly, that's great. Hello, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Al. Thank you.
I'm so glad to talk with you. The reason your name is familiar to me, you've popped up in ModPo conversations here and there, is that whenever I see it, I realize that you have the same name. Granted, it's a common name of the first supporter of the Kelly Writers House, Paul Kelly, here in the East, and who became a great friend.
Yeah, I was amused when I first found that out.
Yeah. So you're in Wyoming, and how connected are you with ModPo?
So I found ModPo this late in the fall, and then have been doing and did a little bit, but then I've just been doing all the slow pos this winter. And I guess spring, though, in Wyoming, winter has just sort of passed.
Oh, gosh. You really need to move to a different... No, you don't. You can stay there and have a good time in the winter. So you've gotten to know Amber Rose Johnson through Slowpo, no?
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of teacher is she?
I'm thoughtful and interesting, and she, put fascinating things in front of us, and which is what most of the Slowpos have done.
Yeah.
It's actually been fun to have that experience where the professors or the teachers, whatever, come in with somewhat light comments. I think they enjoy reading a lot of whatever the ideas we come up with are, whether good, bad, indifferent.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks for participating in that. And you're right. If you joined us late in the fall of 2022, now you're doing Slowpo, and I hope you'll join us starting September 2nd to go through the 10 weeks, all together for ModPo 2023. Well, Amber Rose is teed up to be the first respondent to your question or comment, so let's hear it.
Okay, so I feel a lot of irony, kind of distancing irony in the poem. It doesn't feel to me romantic, but to play off of some of those tropes or images. I feel this kind of tension between what it says at the beginning, that she has nothing on her mind, and the final line that she collects her motion into shape, which is a very kind of conscious thing to do. And on the one hand, that last line seems a bit like the painting itself, which in a sense collects all the motion into some kind of shape. But within Kennedy's poem, it feels like, to me, some kind of commentary on the whole posing and the whole watching and posing situation of anyway, so I was just curious about that whole sort of what's Kennedy's play with these kind of romantic or sensual images, which feel very different to me than the painting does. And this kind of, where is the, I don't know, that was my thought, and just any responses to that.
Love it. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. I think that's great. So we'll see you around ModPo, I hope, a lot. And if you hang up now, you can watch the response on a slight delay through YouTube. Thank you, Paul. And we'll see you in ModPo. We'll see you around. Amber Rose, Paul raised a number of questions. One is about tone. Said it was the poem is satirical. The other is that something that I respond to positively. There's not much I respond to positively in this poem, but the end of it, it's really kind of a smart way of describing the painting at the very end, collecting motions into shape, as if it's a motion study. And when you get to the final stare, it all kind of catches up to you, and you become a body, a unified body. That seems to me a pretty smart way of describing the poem. Okay, I leave it to you to go anywhere with this. Tone, satire.
Yeah, I wanna also pick up on the last line, because I really do like that. And Paul gave me some new things to think about with the tension at the end of that first quatrain, nor on her mind. And whereas in my first comment about the painting, I was thinking about that there isn't a gaze being returned, and so the focus becomes on the form. In the poem, thinking about those two lines especially, there's a way that maybe the figure being described in the poem is very conscious of being watched. And so the collects
Wait, she knows she's being watched?
Yeah, and so the nor on her mind may be satirical in that maybe what's on her mind is just the fact that you're watching her wondering what's on her mind. So that the collecting her motions into shape, to me, is about recognizing that there's someone else who's waiting for like a moment where she is not moving to sort of like reflect and see the whole series that just happened. Sorry to interrupt, can we find in the poem some description of her doings that contributes to our sense that she's self-consciously aware of being watched? I mean, I'll start. Her lips imprint the swinging air. There's a way in which she's kind of sort of blowing us a kiss, or just she's got a facial response to being looked at. Mm-hmm. Ew is my response to that. But anyway, would you say more? Is there anything else that gives us a sense that she's aware that she's being aesthetically objectified by the gazer subject position? A lot of it happens for me in that final stanza. Her slow descend. She wears her slow descend like a long cape.
Like a cape. Mm-hmm. She's not wearing anything. She's naked, but like a cape.
Right.
And pausing on the final stare seems a little showy.
Yeah, there's the poem is giving her a performance that she's then giving back to us.
I'm entering,
and it's weird, but
I'm going out on thin ice here because I don't know this tradition, but social media gives us this view anyway. Isn't there probably a 20th century or maybe even a post-1950s tradition of, on a special night, the young woman comes down the stairs to present herself? Is that like a prom thing? I told you I was on thin ice. Isn't this a trope?
I mean, it's
coming out to society.
Coming out into society, being presented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that.
But in a traditional standpoint, that's also usually a coming out into society, which means a coming out into marriage, into pursuit, into then being put into I'm available to to play a particular role that has been passed down to me. Yeah, and I think that kind of spirit, which is very much a patriarchal spirit, is infiltrating the poem.
Nothing on her mind, nor on her mind, is to be. We're going to turn to Lainey next. To be not cruel, to be harsh on the poem, which I'm inclined to be generally. The speaker's basically saying she's not thinking of anything. She's a dumb, she's not thinking. She's not an intellect right now, and that is reinforced by this scenario you're describing, where she's being presented as a body. Usually, the presentation is, look what I'm wearing for my big night. In this case, nothing.
Right.
Lainey, wow, I guess, and thanks to Paul Keller for the question. Lainey, you want to take it from here?
Sure.
Okay.
Just to connect to what we were just talking about, there's a comment on YouTube from Jen Levin who says, women were still walking down staircases at grand events to make their entrance. One of the things I think X.J. Kennedy sums up comments on. I think that's all correct. And I also think that the poem is projecting that onto the painting rather than that being in the painting.
Oh, he's interpreting Marcel Duchamp, whose a gender and sexual identity is not at all what I think Kennedy is maybe projecting onto it, which is, oh, come on, you're such a modernist, but you too were thinking about the presentation of a woman in this way.
Right. And so I feel like the poem, it's really in opposition and it's trying to be clever. And in multiple ways. One way is that the painting is very innovative, and the poem formally is the opposite of innovative.
It's anti-innovation.
So the rhyme scheme, the orderliness, the quatrains really clashes with what the painting is trying to do. And then the question of the we, which has been brought up, the poem wants to insist on where the gaze of the reader is in relation to the painting. And the painting requires the viewer to figure out a perspective. So again, really opposite.
That's right. So Duchamp is saying, let's liberate the idea of where you stand in relation to an art object. Let's create multiple ways in which to see and multi-perspectival freedoms. And Kennedy seems to be initiating a rearguard action to try to consolidate that back into a stable subject position for a speaker. So it's anti-modernist specifically. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Sophia, Gabby, and João are next. I guess go anywhere you want with this, Sophia, but I think we're trying to get to the point. I mean, Kennedy must have known he was doing something anti-modernist here. So is there any respect due to this anti-modernist position? The poem appears in our course in week 5 at the very end, where we're looking at a couple of examples of, we call it 1950s formalism or Cold War formalism. This is definitely a formalist poem. So can we say anything? I don't want to say positive about it, but what is the point of view being? Is there a justification for this point of view? What's he thinking? What's going on?
I don't
Sorry
know
to put that on you.
I don't know if I want to justify the point of view, but
yeah, I didn't mean justify. Like, what is the point of view?
I think okay. Gabby mentioned earlier that this isn't the painting specifically isn't like a perfect cubism representation, because it feels more like different moments from the same perspective happening on top of each other or slowly or descending upon one another. And I think there's something to be said about the multiple perspectives that is implied in the poem, like the we spy, this like layering of writer and reader and voyeur that is maybe working toward that, but I don't know. That's just a half-baked thought.
If it's a satire, Sophia, and then we'll turn to Gabby. If it's a satire, it is complaining it wants to move forward in a different direction. And as a satire, it's possible that Kennedy is satirizing the kind of point of view that spies beneath the banister. I'm trying to reclaim, I'm doing badly here, but I'm trying to reclaim a satire as making a point, as Lainey put it, about what Kennedy presumes Duchamp was doing wrong. Is there something we can say that Duchamp was doing wrong that a different form of poetry some decades later is going to try to correct? Can we give any credence to the satire? I mean, we get a lot of flack in ModPo when we say negative things about this poem. People are upset because we're not giving Kennedy any kind of due here. So I don't know what I'm doing here, inviting you to say a little more about the satire.
Is it, I mean, I'm not convinced it's satire, but if we want to go with that, are you saying like there's, I keep coming back to the point of view for the painting and how the subjectivity has more to do with the point of view if we're going to run with that, which I kind of agree. But I guess the only way I could see this as a satire is kind of in this final moment where she collects her emotions into shape and there is a subjectivity where she does this action. But that's kind of the only place I see.
This is really interesting. Gabby and then João. Let's see if we can push this a little forward.
I actually think there's another Duchamp work that might be helpful here, which is étant donné, which literally means being given, but it's sometimes like called the pornographic door, also at the PMA. This is
here in Philadelphia is what you're saying, and I think you should describe it because if Kennedy's responding to that, then, sorry, Gabby, then Kennedy is saying, look, you guys think that I'm an anti-feminist by writing about this woman in this way, but actually you really need to look back at Duchamp and the way that he gazed.
I don't actually... okay, that's not what I was going to say.
I know.
But I'll tell you what I was going to say. So to explain it, the étant donné is it is an installed door, literal wood door with two peepholes. And when you look inside, you're looking at a diorama of a like nude figure who is like kind of headless. You just really see literally her body, and she is in the middle of the field, and she is motionless. Sort of
and there
obviously
has been
because she's
some
a diorama.
kind of scene of violence, and we, by peeping in there, are participating in the peeping.
So I do think that we're making some assumptions when we say that, but I do think you're right to make those assumptions in the sense that
I feel that way when I go there and look.
It's really uncomfortable.
Creepy.
I mean, the body looks dead. The coloration of her skin is very uneven and very sort of odd and pale. But okay, the reason I'm bringing this up is like one of the works that piece does, one of the things that piece does is very much call attention to the fact of your looking. I mean, it's called being given, and you have to like look at it through this peephole, and it's literally a diorama. If it kind of just constantly calling attention to your own perspective in the scene, this poem version of Nude Descending the Staircase seems to do a similar thing, maybe less conscientiously. I sort of trust that Duchamp piece is not as like horrifically sexist as your preface to my comment makes it sound. Like, I actually think there's something interesting about what's going on there that is useful from a feminist analysis. But anyways, I think this piece is almost like the best reading you could give it, I think, is saying that it is also calling attention to a certain perspective of gaze that is actually being kind of effaced by Duchamp's painting. Like Duchamp's painting in its representative uncertainty or instability is like actually kind of effacing the fact of viewership in the first place, so that it doesn't feel like the kinds of nudes that come before it where having a spectator is very much a part of it. And the nude figure seems to be almost like predicting that she will have a spectator. Here, that's not really happening in the Duchamp piece. And it's almost like Kennedy's bringing that back in a very forceful and frankly, I would say a little clumsy way. If that all makes sense. I feel like I said a lot of things there.
Yes. No, that's really interesting. We're going to turn to João. to continue this any way he would like to. I keep thinking, Gabby, about how we all reacted to the AMC series Mad Men. Also, it's depicting 1960 and then some years afterwards, and it does so in a way that is like crazily ambivalent, because it sounds like, it's almost like the Kennedy poem. We spy beneath the banner. That's what we do. That's what we used to do. That is the way we are. That is the given, to play off the Duchamp. That is what's given. And what do we do with that? And is the modernism that I am, that thinks of itself as revolutionary and liberated, maybe my satire is that it ain't so much, because this is what we do. This is what male artists, do when they look at the nude and pretend to de-eroticize it, but actually didn't. So that's the kindest thing that I can say, that it's exploring that. I do think it's worth thinking about that. João, I cannot wait to hear what you're thinking about all this. This is something.
I'm honestly still trying to process Gabby's and your comments, but I'll just add more infusion to all of this, maybe by just bringing in the when I didn't know this poet at all, right? Like, so I had to read some other of his poems, and I was looking at his back catalog and his biography and whatnot, and he's apparently like also a children's poet, right? He writes poetry for children, right?
Yeah.
So there's also an element of that here, right? That's maybe not just parody per se, but also he wants to be humorous, right, and funny, and there's for sure an element of something sing-songy about the whole thing.
Yeah, it's comic. It's comic. It's a comic satire.
Sure.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. No,
yeah,
and
I mean, it's possible that We Spy are the young kids. I mean, it's possible. This is like a creepy antecedent to children's books, gosh. So I don't even want to go there. But We Spy Beneath the Banister that's an adolescent thing at best. But yeah, Amber Rose, you're about to say something. You took a breath.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, thinking about, I don't know how much I really want to linger with thinking about this as children, but I did have an experience. My father would be mortified. I did have an experience of seeing my father
naked. Your dad's watching this webcast, no doubt.
It was mortifying. He thought I had already left. I missed my bus. I had to go back to the house, and I was mortified. But thinking about memory and the sing-song nature of memory, there was a way that, because it was such a shocking image, it was like it happened in slow motion. And unfortunately, I'll never forget it. But thinking about memory and meter and the slowness and the fragmentation of the movement.
Oh my God, I we'll have to get XJ Kennedy here to probe the childhood trauma that's being reproduced. No, I'm serious. It becomes almost horror.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really so bothered. I'm going to turn to Ellen in a second, and then Elina, Amber Rose, and Lainey. But Ellen, I want you to start thinking about William Carlos Williams again, if you don't mind. I know you had something else you wanted to say, but I want to get back to that. But before I do, We Spy Beneath the Banister, a constant thresh of thigh on thigh. That is just awful. Mm-hmm. It's just awful. I mean, in what world is that funny? But no, Lainey's saying, well, in the world of 1960, I mean, Don Draper, I suppose. But constant thresh of that is supposed to be a satire of what's happening in the painting. I'm looking at the painting, and yeah, okay, a constant thresh of thigh on thigh. Thresh is an agricultural term that really bothers me because it has to do with sort of mutilating crops and stuff. That's bad. It's clever linguistically. And then thigh on thigh. So we've got a nude person coming down the stairs, and it's thigh rubbing to create the sound of the poem that creates an iambic a constant thresh of thigh on thigh. There's a kind of iambic pounding. I mean, it's abusive, and wow. I mean, this poet is so in control. So this is a conscious rendering of a sound made by a woman's nude body coming down the stairs as a response to Duchamp. Wow, I want to say. It almost makes you want to write a whole book about 1960 to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Ellen, do you mind if we turn to Williams? I want to say something provocative and get your response. I think that this is an anti-William Carlos Williams poem through Duchamp. I think Duchamp is standing in for the Williams that a lot of people wanted to react against by the end of the 50s. So I don't know, it's a provocative statement. I have some reasons for saying it, but not particular ones. And I wonder what your thought is about that. You may want to just speak generally about that anti-Williams point where academic poetry magazine, edited by Henry Rego, who was definitely not a Williams fan, while the New American Poetry was being published in 1960, there was all this like a continuation of modernism, but there was a real reaction against that. I don't know specifically enough biography of Kennedy to know where he stood in relation to that, but this poem seems to be evidence for, well, you know, Amy Clampett years later said a very different kind of poet from Williams said things like, Williams kind of flattened out the whole thing by generating a whole bunch of imitators in the 50s and 60s. Is it possible that this is a reaction against that? Sorry, Ellen, to spring that on you.
Well, I didn't think of that at first, but when you started saying that you had a question for me on Williams, I was thinking about his many poems about women as well, right? But he doesn't do it this way. And there's a lot to say about that too. And of course, you know, we could talk about that all day, but
we shouldn't we? Because so many poems in the 1930s were Williams passing by in his car and looking at a woman who's, you know, not quite dressed for the day. I'm thinking of a particular poem where she's coming out to get the milk and he sees her. He certainly did his share of gazing.
Exactly. And he's also, just to go back actually to Gabby's comment on the gaze, I mean, he did work in Goya's La Maya Desnuda in his work, sometimes like, for example, in Core in Hell, I think, and she's famous for gazing back and forcing spectators at the museum to feel ashamed for gazing. And I feel like in Duchamp's painting, we don't get that shame because we don't have that kind of powerful gaze calling us out on our gazing. Whereas that seems to be reinscribed in a way in Kennedy's poem. But as far as anti-Williams goes, I mean, obviously there's the whole metric aspect of it, and the rhyme that would have been anathema. Maybe that's too strong a word, but something of the sort. And all, I mean, the word thresh in itself is part of an alliteration, right? So it's kind of like maybe that word it's formally called for, orally asked for, but it also seems extremely, maybe not violent. I had to look it up. I mean, I'm not a native speaker, so I also, you know, noted this: strike repeatedly or separate seed from plant mechanically.
Wow, yeah. A reference to the mechanicalness of the early modernists.
That's what I was thinking too, that goes actually back a bit to the way I felt that Duchamp had this mechanic look on the painting.
Wow. Thank you. You're wonderful. You know, we just threw this Williams at you, and it was really incredibly helpful. It makes us all think that the Kennedy satire is very, as much as it creeps us out, maybe some of us, it's very thoughtful. He's very conscious. Deploying a word like thresh, which may be a response to Williams-esque modernism. Wow. Yeah. Elina, we're going to pause for a second before we turn to you and collect some comments that are being made in YouTube. Twitter is just so totally silent, Sophia, as far as you can tell. Okay, so let's go, Lainey, first to the YouTube chat. What's happening?
Yeah, we have a comment from someone on YouTube, and the screen name is That's Baloney, which is so great.
That's baloney?
Hi, That's Baloney, wherever you are.
Baloney as in baloney, like bad
bologna sandwich.
lunch meat? Yeah, okay.
Exactly, which is funny in
that's
the
baloney.
context of our conversation. But the comment I'm going to, and there's more than one, but this one, I love this question. Where does the artist end and the viewer/reader begin? Who is doing the eroticizing?
Cool. Elina, you just heard that comment, so we're making you improvise, but do you want to respond to that comment? I'm going to ask Lainey to repeat it, and then you're invited to say anything you want, followed by Amber Rose.
Where does the artist end and the viewer/reader begin? Who is doing the eroticizing?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and really difficult to answer in a way, because certainly in the painting, I don't think there's much of this eroticizing, but then it's easier for me to see that in the poem. But it's, yeah, I don't know. It's not such a huge part of the poem. It's maybe on some of the lines, like "we spy," which is already implying that the viewer is doing something that's forbidden and something that they shouldn't be doing. But then there are, of course, these other parts that describe it like almost like it's an image of nature. There's snow and lemon and things like that. So, so yeah, I can see that eroticizing going on in that poem. There's something voyeuristic about this poem that I don't necessarily like very much. But then, but yeah, it's a good question to think about. Where does it begin? Yeah.
Amber, I'm going to ask you to pick up on that, but I also want to invite Elina to say anything, because you had been expecting to say something else about the poem, and I'm sure you have a thought. Is there something else you want to add?
Well, yeah, I guess earlier I was thinking when you, Al, were saying that about those lines, "we spy beneath the banister, a constant trash of thigh on thigh," that those lines are awful in a way. And that's really, in the poem, that's something that's also, I feel, very embarrassing for the speaker to say. And when I was reading this earlier, in my mind, I actually started thinking about confessional poetry, which was being written at the time as well in the 1960s. And I was thinking of maybe poems like Robert Lowell's Skunk Hour, which has sometimes, I think, been described in similarly voyeuristic ways, because in that poem, in Skunk Hour, he drives up the hill to look at people making out in cars or something like that.
Yes.
And so yeah, then that also then made me think about how maybe in this poem there's this uncomfortable, resigned sense as well, that the speaker is sort of revealing all these things about himself, things that he feels.
So glad you mentioned Lowell, because it makes me prefer Kennedy to Lowell. Kennedy is being very explicit about this gazing. Whatever we think of the result, Amber Rose, very explicit, and makes it really clear through the formalism of the poem that this is a structured satire of gazing, whereas Lowell, sorry, I'm going to be really anti-Lowell here. Lowell sort of pretends to be writing in confessional, psychologically real free-ish verse. It's not rhymed. So Lowell is presenting us this situation of depression and madness that, as Elina points out, leads him up to the hill where the high school kids make out in their cars, and he's feeling very lonely, and we're supposed to feel bad for him, when in fact it's super creepy, but the creepiness is covered over by the free-ish confessional quality of the thing. And I think I prefer Kennedy to that, because Kennedy is saying, yeah, I got something to say. It's not very pretty, but, I think this is the way art works, really. It's a little more honest. I don't know. I just want to toss it over to you because you're so great at getting us out of these situations.
Well, I actually wanna jump back to the comment that Lainey read and the word erotic. And I loved the things that were being said. And when I hear the word erotic, it makes me think of Audre Lorde, who was of age. Lorde was born in 1934, so was in her 30s in the 60s. This wasn't written. I want to just read one line from The Uses of the Erotic, which is a book and an essay that she writes in 1978. She says, "The erotic has often been misnamed by men and used against women. It has been made into the confused, the trivial, the psychotic, the plasticized sensation. For this reason, we have often turned away from the exploration of the erotic and turned away from the exploration and consideration of the erotic as a source of power and information, confusing it with its opposite, the pornographic." So I'm thinking about the difference between erotic and pornographic, and whether or not the question that was being asked in the comment on YouTube from That's Baloney was really about whether it becomes pornographic in the eye of the viewer. But I want to then respond and ask, what's the difference between eroticism and pornographic, and how might we see them differently? How might the poem be giving us something that's erotic? The painting might be giving us something that's erotic in terms of how the shapes and the lines move, and then the poem responds with something that feels more pornographic.
Helpful distinction. Thank you. Great to bring the Lorde piece in. What I would like to do is turn to Lainey for a thought on this, and then we're going to do a full round of final thoughts, it being near the end of our time together. So we'll just go through, and everyone can just add anything at all about the conversation. Before we start final thoughts, we'll also take a quick look at comments that others have made, and we have time for one more call in case someone wants to call. 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208, and you can do an audio Skype at ModPo Pen. Lainey, you want to add to the discussion about the language of the poem?
Yeah, I would say that Kennedy wants to eroticize the painting, and the painting is not erotic unless we want to interpret erotic in terms of the excitement of doing something new in art, as we talk about with language all the time in ModPo. So I think Deschamps is more interested in, what is seeing, what is portraiture, what does it mean to be, human in this modern age of mechanism and industry? What does it mean to be a form, to be a body? What does that mean energetically? What does that mean? Anthony Watkins writes about that it's about a painting about architecture, right? So there's a lot of other ways. So I think that erotic, in terms of a romantic, sexual depiction of female nudes in that tradition, I don't think that's really what Duchamp is interested in. And again, Kennedy is pointing that way in the poem.
Oh, that's so great, Lainey, what you just said. Really good literary history, too, or poetic history. Because the idea of modernism was not to eliminate forms, but to find forms in new places. So the body as a form in a cubist or vorticist way is the formalism, right? And Kennedy and his colleagues in the 50s and early 60s, we'll call them new formalists, thought that the form had to be in the aesthetic of the poem. And so this is a formalist poem, as if the body as a form could be rendered in a kind of old formalism called new formalism. And that's a misreading of Duchamp and other modernists, because they're not anti-formalist. They're just finding different forms. This is what Williams was all about, among others. Thinking about, and Picasso in a certain period, thinking about, and Wallace Stevens thinking about the bottle as a form sufficient in itself to be written about in a non-formalist way as verse. Okay, thank you, Lainey. We're going to do final thoughts now, and we'll start with Sophia. Anything at all, Sophia, that you are thinking about or feeling about this conversation that we've had?
Well, okay. I'm still thinking about Amber Rose, what you said about seeing something in slow motion. And I'm thinking about how the pace of the painting kind of reminds me of, and like the perspective of the painting reminds me a little bit of a long exposure photograph. And the politics of representing and reproducing something that we witness is informed by how we consume something. So I'm thinking about seeing how, like the different ways that the painter and the poet saw something, and that creating this division in their representation and reproduction of it.
Thank you, Sophia. Thanks so much. Okay, we're going to turn to Gabby for a final thought, and then we might have someone on the phone. Gabby, what are you thinking?
Yeah, actually, I mean, related to what Sophia just said, I think what I want to say is it feels like for a defining feature of modernism is the deep cross-pollination of different forms of art. And we've been talking a lot about painting and poetry for obvious reasons, but I also think it's worth it to bring up cinema here, because Nude Descending a Staircase is very much influenced by the kind of like motion study photography of somebody like Edvard Muybridge.
That's right.
And like, that's the foundation for cinema. And, you know, this is a moment historically at which cinema is kind of this young nascent genre that's sort of like working itself out. Whether the poem from Kennedy is also engaging something cinematic, I'm not so sure. And actually maybe that might be one of its sort of like, I don't know, issues. But I just think it's worth it to just bring that up as another kind of generic field that seems to be in this.
Thank you so much, Gabby. We have someone on the phone, so we'll take a last call with a question. Who is it, Chris?
Yes, Al. We have Veronica calling from Northern Florida.
All right. First-time callers, everybody. Veronica, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, loud and clear. Are you Southern Florida, Middle Florida,
good.
Central Florida?
No, very northern here. I'm a long-time ModPo person since maybe 9 years, I'm estimating.
My goodness.
I lived in Peru. I started with the Coursera and you all.
Wow. And this is your first time calling?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I called once from Italy. I also lived in Italy and I called a few times. So yeah, I've been doing this for a while.
Oh, Veronica, this is
veteran.
great. You have no idea. Well, you probably do have some idea how pleasurable it is for us to encounter people who've been part of this thing
great.
for 9 years. It's really, it's overwhelming.
Amazing.
Thank you. Hi.
I have a
do you
quick
want to
comment.
Yes.
Yes. As we look at this poem and the painting, we're delving into the past, right? And I'm just really fascinated about delving into the future, our future, where we have these robotic figures that look much like Nude Descending the Staircase and AI, artificial intelligence. So that's fascinating me because we're in the cusp of this. And that's the future. I don't know if someone wants to make a quick comment about that. Thank you.
That is great. Thank you, Veronica. Thanks for watching today. What a great comment. I'm going to throw it open. Anybody who wants to comment, just sort of raise your finger up so I can see. Okay, I'll start, and then someone's going to think about it. I do think that this is, there's something. Thanks, Veronica. I don't know if you're still in. Thank you so much. I do think
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. I think that the painting has always suggested something robotic to us, and that's why I agree with Lainey and others, it's not intended to be erotic. It's tending to de-eroticize the body, as so much visual and poetic art was in this period. That in itself could be described as a kind of feminism to try to break from the romantic past. I just would point out in response to Veronica that the Duchamp kind of lives today in the world of non-human it's all human origin, but non-human effect of motion and language. And the Kennedy is nowhere near that. The Kennedy poem is not at all participating in that future, except if you put into ChatGPT that I want to write a satiric response to Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase using rhymed quatrains, it would probably come up with something not nearly as proficiently creepy. But there you go. Who wants to say something about this? This is really an interesting comment.
I can say it.
Amber Rose.
Yeah, my thought is just that, I mean, the whole AI imaging thing sort of freaks me out. But I think one thing that I'm experiencing is my eye looking more for the breaks and fragmentation that sort of announces the artificial nature of an image. And yeah, the way that we have this painting that sort of happens in a series of parts is maybe giving us a way to think about breaks and juxtapositions and ways of sort of evaluating how an image collects.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ambrose, and thank you, Veronica. And now to continue final thoughts, we turn to João. Final thought?
Sure. I wanted to maybe take what Amber Rose was saying about parts, because that's maybe something we haven't talked much about, like how the poem like runs on parts, right? Like parts being body parts, of course, and but right here it seems also to be alluding to parts of a machine, right? Or parts of a body in the sense of not only like just your pelvis or your breasts or whatever, right? But severed limbs or whatever, right? And as you were saying, parts of a machine, right? I think it alludes to that. But here, of course, my response is to say that I do think the poem is extremely erotic, right? In the sense that, if you pay attention to, let's say, this line here, one woman waterfall she wears, right? Like there's an overload of an overuse even of sound, right? Of alliteration, right? And these are parts, in a way, parts of the poem that that are being added, right, to create an effect, right, an overall effect that is a musical effect, I think, right? And as another difference that compared to the painting, we said before that the painting might be more explicit or in your face and dry or raw, right? Whereas here you even pointed this out, El, that this nude is even not nude at all, right? She's wearing a cape, right? So in a way, there is like layers of in this case sound, maybe, right? Layers of imagery that we can tear apart and enjoy or feast on, I guess, right? I think that's the aim here, right? It's not just satirical; it's also meant to be enjoyable, right? Pretty. He's as I said at the beginning, maybe distilling the spirit of the painting, right? And rounding out its edges, turning it into something, pleasant, pretty, right? A snowing flesh, right? Which evokes, in my mind at least, again, like the dynamism of the painting, but it adds this extra layer of pleasantness, right? And as I said, maybe a romantic sublime, right? There, right? That there's the fusion between the body, right, and nature, right? That we also find in Duchamp's painting. And I don't think that I'll shut up. I'll just add this, that I do think the original painting is erotic in a way, right? Erotic in the sense that it's glamorizing, or it's also feasting upon dynamism, right? And the body as something that can be represented in art as something dynamic, complex, in process, right? And that dimension, right? If you think about futurism, right, that dimension of the body in motion is erotic, right, and is sexual in a way, right? So that's it.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you, João. That's great. Appreciate that. I have all kinds of thoughts, but I'm going to restrain myself and turn to Elin for a final thought.
I was also interested in the idea of the parts, just like João was talking about, because I was thinking about how, you have the toe and the thigh, and then again you have these and the parts, and then you have all these disparate elements and images, like a lemon, snowing flesh, like you said, and waterfall, and how these then are collected into shape, not only by the more agentic, I guess, woman in the poem in the final quatrain, but also by the poem's formal features that kind of collect these disparate elements into shape. And then I was also, I've been all along thinking about the difference between something that is daintier or more, possible to sift, and then Duchamp's painting, which to me doesn't really seem to be that. But one analogy that I don't really see Duchamp's figure as nude. I mean, it really looks like it's wearing clothes. It looks almost like a sketch for fashion design of some kind, right?
Yes.
So then I'm thinking about this descent like a cape, that is maybe somehow really in correspondence to not just kind of mocking or being satirical, but also responding to Duchamp's painting. So I really don't, I was a bit thrown when, wow, you also did this with the parts. So, but I think the parts, to let her parts go by, there's something really, that word is not neutral to me. But I think that it's also the way that this is, because what is interesting is this final quatrain where this person is a one woman waterfall. So now it's like there's some kind of reinstallment happening there of the more agentic woman.
Wow, that's great. You said a lot, but my favorite thing of what you said is that it could be a sketch for fashion design. Totally agree with that. That's amazing. And you're doing something akin to what João was just doing, which is to somewhat recuperate our points about the way the poem actually does show some fidelity in language to the visuality. And I think it's important, since so many of us have said such critical things of it, that that the work of that final stanza is almost descriptive. It's trying to be descriptive. Thank you. Elina, final thought?
Yeah, maybe I'll pick up on what Elin said about how the painting doesn't really look like a nude, and that reminded me of what I said in the beginning as well about it being quite nondescript, and also how we can't necessarily tell whether it's a man or a woman or anything like that. But ultimately then what the poem seems to be doing is that it attempts to capture the painting and sort of to maybe even halt the interpretive freedom that would otherwise be available to a viewer of the painting. So just like the Kennedy writes, pausing on the final stare collects her emotions into shape, in some ways what this poem does is that it attempts to collect the motions of a viewer's mind into the shape of a poem about this painting. But that's sort of attempting to halt all that interpretation that we could otherwise do. But of course, it doesn't necessarily fully end there, because during this discussion, we've also presented many ways of viewing this poem. Like, people have talked about it as satire, but then maybe not as satire. And I don't know, I think personally I'd like to leave that open, because I'm someone who likes to always think that there should be many different interpretations of a poem that are possible at the same time. So maybe I can leave that as open in that sense. But in some ways, this is, I think, a poem that attempts to capture something that is much more narrower than what it responds to.
I just love that spirit of openness here, and would just like to just stipulate something or repeat a fact, which is that despite my impression that the poem kind of is a been there, done that, it does its thing and we can move on, ModPo is a little obsessed with it. We keep coming back to the relationship between this poem and the Duchamp, trying to figure it out. So you're right. We need to keep thinking about this. Thank you. Amber Rose, final thought?
My final thought is really to echo Joao's final thought, that I stand by that the poem is also erotic, but that it challenges us to think about what the erotic can mean. I think that it shows us sensation and dynamism, and movement and feeling in these other ways that are non-sexual. Yeah, that's my final thought.
Thank you. And Lainey, final thought?
Yeah, I'm really interested in this question of what is nudity and what is really seeing. So it's possible that a nude woman posing for a painting isn't naked. In other words, the painting asks us to question, what is essence? What is Duchamp trying to represent in here? What might be I don't want to say realistic, but a classical nude isn't necessarily more, quote, naked than this particular painting. And I also think it's important just to remember that, innovation in art and painting is often met with backlash and resistance. And Kennedy is situating himself in the poem against, and we're so interested in conversations in ModPo, and the different points of view. And so putting the poem and the painting, we're looking at this conversation between a painter and a poet across time. And when this painting was, this is an early piece for Duchamp. It precedes the ready-mades, and it's like a pivotal moment. And it really began Duchamp breaking with the Cubists. So again, constant innovations. And the resistance and the innovation goes back and forth in the conversations, and breaking old forms to create something new is what we're witnessing in the painting.
Oh, beautifully said. All right, I'm going to offer a quick final thought, and then I'm going to go around and thank people for participating. Gabby's had to leave, so who will watch the replay later? Gabby, thank you. I think that the poem is interesting, continues to be interesting, at least to me, because it is programmatic. It is a programmatic poem. In that sense, it's a meta poem, because you wouldn't think that it's a meta poem, but it's a meta poem in the sense, not simply because it uses the word imprint and describes parts, which, as Ellen and others have said, once you see the word part as a noun following the use of the word parts as a verb, it's really paying close attention to partness, and partness is the aesthetic ideology to which it is responding, that of early modernism. So it is a programmatically anti-modernist poem that depends utterly for its forward progression, as it were, on modernism. It wouldn't be what it is without modernism. So I guess I want to say, put in a plug for anyone, scholar, critic, student, reader, to start forming a 50s teens or a 50s 20s. What did the period, the post-war period anyway, in U.S. poetry, similar, somewhat similar in European poetry, what was it trying to do at the end of the consolidationist post-war period with that radical break that had been made prior to the war? What happened during that war that kind of flattened things out and made us look askance at the powerful radicalism, aesthetic radicalism of the pre-war period? And I want to do more work on X.J. Kennedy. I don't know much about him, but I know that he went to Columbia University before the war and enlisted in the United States Navy. So he participated in the Navy in the Atlantic, not in the Pacific. So he was sort of presumably thinking a lot about the relationship between the U.S. and Europe, which was something somewhat new for American artists. Sure, in the 20s there was a big step forward to Europe, but thinking about the existence of Europe in that time in the Navy. Then after discharge, he left late in 1955. He went to the Sorbonne, so he, like we might even stayed in Paris. And at the Sorbonne, he would have encountered although the Sorbonne at that time was fairly aesthetically conservative in its visual arts section, he certainly would have encountered the whole story of Duchamp. So he comes back in the late 50s, he gets a job at Michigan teaching, and now he is writing what we would call academic poetry. And I think the story of that, late 50s, 1960, look back at the teens from someone who participated in the war period and then went to the Sorbonne to get an art education. This is in itself a real call for interpreting a poetic history, art history, and literary history in historical terms, which is what João wanted us to do today, and I believe in the initial invitation, and I think we've accomplished it collaboratively and collectively. So thank you, João, for inviting us, the University of Porto, for co-sponsoring us today. Elin Käck in Sweden, thank you so much. It's really great to have you participate. Hope you'll do it again. Elina Siltanen, Siltanen, and I'm sorry for mispronouncing it, in Finland, associated with the University of Turku. Sophia DeRose, thank you, as always. Gabby in absentia, thank you. Amber Rose, you're the best. Congratulations on your new position, and weeping as a result of the idea that you won't be here with us every week in ModPo in the fall, but I know that you'll be making cameo appearances. I hope. We haven't actually sealed the deal on that, but we have more to go. And Lainey Brown, as always. And also Zach Hardner, Chris Martin. This will be recorded. This will always be recorded, and so we basically have that. Oh, look, they're showing us. Hello, guys. We appreciate Caroline McCrae calling from Philly, Paul Kelly calling from Wyoming, and Veronica from Northern Florida. Thanks all for tuning in, and we wish you a really good day and a good week, and hope you'll read some poems.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much.
João, thank you. Let's do it again sometime.